Welcome, sleepy souls. I am your storyteller, Mr. Dread. Tonight, I'm here to help you drift into deep, peaceful sleep. But before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime stories. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is right now. And if there's a story you'd like to hear next, I would love to know that too. What if your favorite childhood game wasn't just a game, but a contract? Ethan still remembered the rules. He wished he didn't. The reunion wasn't his idea. That was Mark's doing, Mark with his endless charm and reckless grin, the same grin that had gotten them into trouble 100 times before. One last night together, Mark had said on the group chat. For old time's sake. So here they were, Ethan, Mark, Sarah, Jess, and Daniel, crammed into Mark's dusty lake house that hadn't seen life in over a decade. The place smelled of wood rot and mildew, its walls lined with childhood memories, the kind you thought you'd buried long ago. Sarah broke the silence first, brushing dust off the old coffee table. So, we're really doing this? Mark grinned wider and reached into his duffel bag. Of course we are. He set the box down on the table with a theatrical thud. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. The game. The battered cardboard lid was faded, the letters barely legible, but the name was still there, etched like a scar, Nightmare's End. No one spoke for a long moment. Even Jess, who usually had a sarcastic comment ready for anything, stayed quiet. Daniel finally muttered, "You kept that thing?" Mark shrugged. Of course. It's tradition. Remember how obsessed we were with it? We spent whole summers playing. Yeah, Ethan said quietly. And remember how we stopped? Mark waved him off. We were kids. We scared ourselves with stories, that's all. It's just a game. But Ethan remembered more than stories. He remembered the way the dice sometimes rolled on their own, how the cards predicted things that later came true. He remembered the final night they played, the night they swore they'd never touch it again. The night the game demanded blood. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. I don't think we should. Come on, Mark cut in. Don't be such a buzzkill. We're adults now. It'll be fun. One last game for old time's sake. He lifted the lid. Dust billowed into the air like smoke. Inside lay the board, black and glossy, its surface crisscrossed with winding paths that seemed to shimmer faintly in the dim light. The dice sat in the center, polished bone white. The deck of cards waited like coiled snakes. Ethan's heart thudded painfully. He wanted to leave, but he didn't. None of them did. Maybe it was nostalgia. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe it was something deeper, something the game itself wanted. They sat around the table. Same rules as always, Mark said, his voice carrying that reckless excitement Ethan both hated and admired. We each pick a piece, roll the dice, move along the path, and follow the card's instructions. Simple. Simple, Jess repeated, though her voice cracked. She reached for the pewter raven token, the same one she'd always chosen as a kid. The others followed, Sarah with the silver lantern, Daniel with the wolf, Mark with the crown. Ethan stared at the final token. The dagger. He didn't want it, but his hand moved anyway. The blade gleamed faintly in the low light. Mark clapped his hands. All right. Let's play. He shook the dice and let them fall. They landed with a sharp clatter, 2 sixes. Mark laughed. Lucky as always. He slid his crown along the path until it landed on a blood-red square. Draw a card. He flipped the top card from the deck. For a moment, no one breathed. The card read, "The first to bleed will open the door." Ethan's stomach turned ice cold. Sarah forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow. God, these cards are creepy. It's just trying to freak us out. But then Mark yelped. He stared at his thumb, where a thin line of blood welled up. A paper cut. Shit, he muttered, sucking at the wound. Guess I'm the first to bleed. The lights flickered. They all froze. Daniel whispered, Did you see that? Before anyone could answer, the front door slammed open with a violent crack, as though pushed by an invisible hand. The cold night air rushed in, extinguishing the single lamp that lit the room. For a moment, the only light came from the board itself. It glowed faintly, its path shimmering brighter, as if alive. Ethan's voice shook. We should stop. Right now. But Mark only grinned, his thumb still dripping red. Are you kidding? This is awesome. It's all part of the game. The dice slid across the board on their own. They rolled to a stop in front of Ethan. No one moved. The game had chosen him next. The dice lay in front of Ethan, their ivory edges gleaming faintly in the dim glow that pulsed from the board. No one spoke. The silence was so heavy it pressed down on his chest like a weight. He didn't want to touch them. He didn't want to move, or breathe, or acknowledge that the game had pointed at him. But his hand betrayed him, trembling as it stretched across the table and closed around the dice. They were warm. Too warm, as if someone else had held them only moments ago. His pulse hammered in his ears as he lifted his hand, then let the dice tumble down. They bounced against the glossy black surface and settled on a 5 and a 3. His pewter dagger moved on its own, sliding across 8 squares with a scraping sound that set his teeth on edge. When it stopped, the square beneath it bled from black to crimson, glowing faintly. The deck of cards trembled. The top one slid free, turning lazily in the air before settling face up in front of him. Ethan swallowed hard. The words on the card were stark, written in jagged lettering that looked less printed and more carved. Speak a truth you've never told, or lose your voice. A ripple of unease passed around the table. Sarah leaned forward, her brows knitting together. What the hell does that mean? She whispered. But Ethan already knew. He felt the pressure building in his throat, as if invisible hands were squeezing his windpipe. The board wasn't asking. It was demanding. His mind scrambled for something, anything, that would satisfy the game's cruel request. A truth. Something he had never told. His gaze flicked around the circle, lingering on each of his friends. The pressure in his throat grew tighter, and a burning heat rose in his chest. He couldn't breathe. His mouth opened, and the words tore free before he could stop them. I was the one who pushed Tommy off the pier that summer. The confession hung in the air, sharp and ugly. The room went utterly silent. Sarah's eyes widened. Jess's hand flew to her mouth. Daniel leaned back, his face pale. Mark frowned, as if trying to recall. And then it came to them all at once, Tommy, the neighborhood kid who used to follow them around, desperate to be part of their group. The boy who had slipped and nearly drowned at the lake before the adults pulled him out. They had laughed it off then, convinced it was an accident. Only Ethan had known the truth. Until now. The grip around his throat loosened. He sucked in air, his lungs burning, and the card on the table dissolved into ash. The faint glow from the board pulsed brighter, like a heartbeat. Jess began, but her voice broke. Her face twisted in shock, betrayal, and something darker. Why would you do that? Ethan stammered, but the words caught. He didn't have an answer. He didn't even know why the truth had spilled out like that. He hadn't thought about Tommy in years, hadn't wanted to. The memory had been buried deep, locked away, and the game had ripped it from him like tearing flesh from bone. Mark leaned forward, eyes glittering in the faint light. Holy shit, he breathed. Do you guys see what's happening here? This is insane. The game, it knows. It knows things. His grin widened, manic. It's like, it's alive. Alive? Sarah's voice was sharp, panicked. She shook her head violently. This isn't alive, Mark. This is wrong. This is dangerous. We should stop. Right now. Throw it in the fire, smash it, I don't care, just stop. But the board responded before anyone else could. The dice rattled, moving on their own, spinning across the table with a clatter that echoed far louder than it should have. They came to rest in front of Jess. She flinched, her face pale in the sickly glow. No. No, I'm not playing. She pushed her chair back, standing quickly, but her token, the raven, slid across the board anyway, moving 8 spaces on its own. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. The deck shuddered. Another card rose and flipped over. Defy the rules, and pay the price. The punishment will fit the crime. Jess's scream was instant, raw, and piercing. She clutched her throat, eyes bulging in terror, and collapsed to the floor. Ethan leapt up, his chair crashing behind him. "Jess," he shouted, dropping to his knees beside her. Her face was turning purple, her hands clawing at her neck as though something invisible was strangling her. Daniel scrambled forward, trying to pry her fingers away, but it was useless. Her body convulsed, her heels drumming against the floor. Sarah sobbed, backing against the wall, whispering, "No, no, no," over and over. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Jess gasped, sucking in a ragged breath, tears streaking down her face. She collapsed against Ethan's chest, trembling violently. Her voice, when it came, was hoarse and broken. I couldn't breathe. It was choking me, God, it was choking me. Ethan held her tightly, his own hands shaking. He looked up at the board. The glow pulsed again, brighter now, almost triumphant. Mark stood over it, his expression unreadable. He wasn't grinning anymore. His eyes were wide, fixed on the game like he was staring at a god. "It punished her," he whispered. "It really punished her." No one spoke after that. The air was thick with terror, heavy with the sound of Jess's sobs and the frantic pounding of their own hearts. The dice trembled. And then, slowly, deliberately, they slid across the board. They stopped in front of Daniel. The game wasn't waiting for permission. It was moving forward on its own. And they were all trapped inside it. The dice sat in front of Daniel like a pair of predator's eyes, gleaming faintly in the unnatural glow of the board. He didn't reach for them, not at first. His hands were locked on his knees, knuckles white, as though gripping himself tightly enough might keep him from being dragged into the same nightmare Jess had barely escaped. The silence in the room was unbearable, every breath, every tiny creak of the old lake house magnified into thunder. "I'm not doing this," Daniel said finally, his voice low and hard. "I'm not." But the dice rolled anyway. They twitched once, then spun across the glossy black surface with a life of their own, clattering against the edge of the board before landing on a 4 and a 1. Daniel's wolf token slid forward 5 spaces with a scraping noise that cut through the silence. His jaw tightened, and Ethan could see the sheen of sweat on his forehead even in the dim light. The deck stirred. A card slithered upward, as if drawn by invisible fingers, and flipped in midair before landing neatly in front of him. The words scrawled across it seemed to throb with malevolence. "Reveal what you've taken, or it will be taken from you." Daniel's breath hitched. His gaze darted to the others, then back to the card. His lips pressed into a thin line, and for a long, suffocating moment, he said nothing. The air seemed to grow heavier, as though the house itself was waiting for his answer. Ethan watched the muscles twitch in his jaw, the way his fists clenched against his thighs. Whatever the card demanded, it was digging deep, far deeper than childish mischief or minor secrets. Sarah broke the silence first, her voice trembling. "Daniel, you have to say something. Please. Don't fight it." But Daniel shook his head violently, his teeth gritted. "No. No, I can't." His words were cut short by a sudden wrenching sound, like wood splintering under pressure. The board pulsed with light, and Daniel doubled over, clutching his chest. His body convulsed, a strangled cry tearing from his throat. Ethan lurched forward, but the moment his hand neared Daniel's shoulder, a wave of heat radiated off him, searing and unnatural. Daniel's eyes rolled back, and for an instant, it looked as though something was trying to claw its way out of him from the inside. "Daniel!" Jess croaked, still weak from her own punishment. She crawled closer despite her trembling limbs, reaching out with shaking hands. But the game wasn't finished. Daniel's wolf token began to sink into the board. Slowly, impossibly, it melted into the glossy black surface until only a faint outline remained. At the same time, Daniel's breathing hitched again, like he was choking on his own heartbeat. His skin turned an awful shade of gray. Then the words came, ripped from him against his will, spat out like venom. "It was me," he gasped. "I stole the money from your parents, Mark. It was me. Not the neighbors. Not some stranger. Me." The confession detonated in the room like a bomb. Mark jerked upright, his expression collapsing into shock, then fury. "What?" he barked. "You? That was you? All these years, you let my dad believe our neighbors stole from us? You ruined their lives." His voice cracked with rage. "You ruined my family." Daniel crumpled forward, his forehead smacking against the edge of the table. The pressure seemed to release instantly, leaving him trembling and gasping for air. His wolf token reappeared on the board, solid again, as though nothing had happened. But the damage was done. His secret was no longer his. Mark's hands shook as he pointed at Daniel, his face flushed with fury. "I trusted you. We all trusted you. And this," he jabbed a finger toward the glowing board. "This thing just proved you're nothing but a liar and a thief." "No." Daniel's voice cracked, desperate. "I didn't have a choice. My family was broke, we were drowning, and you had everything. I thought your dad would never even notice. I didn't know it would," he broke off, clutching his head in his hands. The group spiraled into chaos. Sarah pressed her palms to her temples, tears glistening in her eyes, whispering that this wasn't happening, that it couldn't be real. Jess stayed on the floor, rocking back and forth, her voice hoarse as she muttered that they had to stop, they had to end it before the game killed them all. Ethan said nothing. He couldn't. His thoughts were a storm, Jess almost strangled, Daniel nearly ripped apart, the game tearing confessions from them like meat from bone. And he knew, with a terrible certainty, that it wouldn't stop until it got everything it wanted. The dice rolled again. This time they clattered to a halt in front of Sarah. She whimpered and shook her head, her long hair falling in her face. "Please, no, I can't. I can't." Her hands gripped the edge of the table like she was holding on for dear life. But her lantern token moved anyway, sliding across the path with an eerie determination. The deck stirred. A card floated free, spinning once before landing in front of her. "Tell them who you still see at night, or join them in the dark." Sarah's head jerked up, her face pale as chalk. Her lips trembled, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted to Ethan, wide and haunted, and he felt a chill run down his spine. "Sarah," he whispered. "What does it mean?" Her breath came in quick, shallow gasps. She tried to speak, but her throat closed, strangling the words before they could escape. The light from the board dimmed and pulsed, as though growing impatient. Finally, in a voice so faint it was barely audible, Sarah whispered, "I still see him. Tommy. I see Tommy every night. In my dreams. Watching me." The room froze. Every pair of eyes snapped toward her, and for a moment the only sound was the ragged breathing of 5 broken people. Then, somewhere deep in the house, a floorboard creaked. Ethan's blood ran cold. The game had not only pulled their secrets into the open, it was dragging the past back with them. The air inside the lake house shifted the moment Sarah spoke Tommy's name aloud. It was subtle at first, a faint pressure, like the atmosphere before a storm. But then the cold seeped through the walls, through the cracks in the floorboards, through the thin fabric of their clothes, until every one of them could see their breath misting in the dim light. Sarah sat rigid, her hands trembling on the table, eyes wide and glassy as though she was seeing something far beyond the room itself. Ethan's heart thudded painfully in his chest. He remembered Tommy's face, small, pale, framed by a mop of blonde hair that always fell into his eyes. The boy had been younger than all of them, desperate to belong, following them around like a stray dog. Ethan remembered the day at the lake, the way Tommy had gone under, flailing and screaming, the way Ethan had shoved him first, a cruel reflex he had never been able to justify. And now Sarah was saying she still saw him? Night after night? Mark slammed his hands down on the table, shattering the heavy silence. This is bullshit. She's making it up. But his voice cracked, betraying the thin veil of disbelief he was clinging to. His face was pale, his grin long gone. No, Sarah whispered. No, I'm not. I see him. I've seen him for years. At first, I thought it was guilt, nightmares, you know. But it's not. He looks older. Every year, he looks a little older, like he's still growing. And every time I wake up, I feel like someone's in the room with me. Watching. Waiting. Her voice trembled, and her eyes brimmed with tears. I thought it was just me. I thought I was going insane. But now, she gestured toward the glowing board. Now I know it's real. He's real. The house groaned, long and low, as if protesting her words. Somewhere upstairs, a door slammed shut. All 5 of them jumped. Jess let out a broken sob, clutching her arms around herself. Daniel swore under his breath, pacing in a tight circle, his hands buried in his hair. Ethan forced himself to stand, though every instinct screamed at him to run. His legs carried him toward the staircase at the far end of the living room. Don't, Sarah said sharply, her voice cutting through the cold silence. Ethan froze and looked back. Her eyes were locked on him, wide and desperate. Don't go up there. Why not? Ethan asked, though he already knew the answer. Because, she whispered, he's here. The words hung in the air like poison. No one dared move. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to thicken, stretching upward like long black fingers. The single lamp flickered, then steadied, though its glow felt weaker than before. Mark forced a laugh, brittle and hollow. You're all losing it. It's just a game, just some freaky coincidences. You're letting it mess with your heads. But even as he spoke, his eyes flicked nervously to the staircase, and he kept glancing at the corners of the room as though expecting something to step out of them. The dice rattled suddenly, skittering across the board with a violent clatter. They spun in place, whirling faster and faster before crashing to a stop in front of Mark. His crown token lurched forward 6 spaces. A card rose from the deck like smoke, twisting in the air before slamming onto the table. The words were stark, carved deep into the surface, the one you wronged waits upstairs. Face him, or be dragged to him. Mark's bravado crumbled instantly. His face drained of color, his hands twitching. No, he said, shaking his head. No, I'm not doing this. I'm not going up there. He shoved his chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the wooden floor. I don't care what it says. I'm done. I'm not playing anymore. The board pulsed violently, the glow brightening until the entire room was awash in an unnatural light. The temperature plummeted. Every candle, every bulb snuffed out at once, plunging them into darkness. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't see anyone, couldn't see the board, couldn't see his own hand in front of his face. Then, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, descending the staircase. Each creak of the old wood echoed through the suffocating dark. The sound grew louder, closer, until it reached the edge of the living room. Mark, a voice whispered, faint but unmistakably real. Childlike. Broken. It scraped across Ethan's spine like a blade of ice. Mark, come play with me. Mark screamed, a raw, terrified sound that tore through the blackness. Something heavy slammed into the floor. The others scrambled blindly, calling his name, but there was no answer, only the sickening drag of something being pulled across the wood. The lights flickered back on. Mark was gone. Only his crown token remained on the board, lying on its side at the very edge of the crimson path. Jess collapsed to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably, her whole body shaking. Daniel swore again and again, pacing frantically, his face wild. Sarah pressed her hands to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. Ethan felt his entire body go numb. His mind screamed that they needed to leave, to run, to smash the board and tear it apart, but he knew, deep in his bones, that it wouldn't matter. The game had them. And it wasn't finished. The dice rattled again. They rolled across the board, slow and deliberate, before settling in front of Ethan. The dagger waited. And somewhere upstairs, the footsteps began again. The dice sat before Ethan, their ivory surfaces reflecting the faint, unnatural glow from the board. He didn't want to touch them, didn't even want to look at them. His throat was dry, his palms damp with sweat, yet he couldn't tear his eyes away. They had all seen what happened when someone tried to refuse the game. Jess had nearly been strangled, Daniel nearly broken apart, and Mark. Mark had been taken. Taken by footsteps that had no body, by a voice that should have belonged to a boy long dead. The room was suffocatingly still, the silence broken only by Jess's uneven sobs and the steady hum of Sarah's whispered prayers. Ethan's heart pounded so violently he thought it might burst through his chest. He wanted to run, to bolt for the door, to tear himself free of the circle and never look back. But even as the thought crossed his mind, he glanced toward the front entrance, and froze. The door was gone. Where once there had been a chipped wooden door leading out into the night, there was now only wall, smooth, seamless wood that looked as though it had always been part of the cabin. His stomach dropped. He turned sharply to the windows. Where glass should have been, there were only flat, dark panels of wood, polished smooth. No escape. No way out. The house had sealed itself. Jess noticed too. Her sobs turned into frantic whimpers as she scrambled across the floor, her hands slapping desperately against the walls. No! No, 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 this isn't real. It can't do this. It's just a game, it can't. Her voice broke into a scream as she clawed at the wood where a window had been, her nails tearing and bleeding against the unyielding surface. Daniel grabbed her, pulling her back before she hurt herself further. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot with terror. Stop it, Jess. Stop, you'll only make it worse. Ethan's chest heaved as he staggered back toward the table, his gaze fixed on the dice. He knew what the game wanted. It wasn't going to let them leave until they played. And if they resisted, Mark's fate had already made that clear. His trembling fingers closed around the dice. They burned against his skin, hot as iron pulled from a fire, and for a moment he almost dropped them. But the weight of silence, the suffocating pressure of the house itself, forced him forward. He let them fall. They clattered against the glossy black surface, bouncing wildly before settling on a 7. His dagger token slid forward, scraping across the board until it landed on a square that pulsed with crimson light. The deck shivered. A card rose, twisting in the air before landing neatly in front of him. Ethan's stomach dropped as he read the words. Return to where it began. The lake waits. Blood must answer blood. His breath caught in his throat. He knew exactly what it meant. The lake where Tommy had nearly drowned. The lake where Ethan had pushed him. His vision swam, and for a moment he thought he might be sick. He stumbled back, shaking his head violently. No. No, I'm not going out there. But Sarah's voice came, small and broken. There is no out there, Ethan. He turned to look at her. She was staring at the walls, at the places where doors and windows had been erased. Her face was white, her lips trembling. The house, it's not just keeping us in. It's changing. It's becoming the game. Her words proved true almost immediately. The floor beneath them shuddered. The walls groaned, stretching, warping, twisting into shapes that defied logic. The air grew damp, heavy with the stench of stagnant water. Ethan looked down in horror as the floorboards between the table and the staircase darkened, the wood softening, seeping moisture until black water bubbled up through the cracks. Within seconds, the living room floor had become a swampy, reeking expanse of muck. And at its center, where the boards had rotted away completely, a pool of water spread outward, still, black, and endless. The lake. Jess screamed again, clutching Daniel's arm, pointing at the water. Ripples spread across its surface, though no one had moved. Something was stirring beneath, something vast and heavy. Ethan's entire body went cold. The board pulsed again, brighter now, casting jagged shadows across their faces. The card dissolved into ash between his fingers, and the dagger token began to glow. Ethan's chest constricted. He knew what it wanted. It wanted him in that water. Daniel swore violently, pulling Jess closer, his own eyes wide with horror. "It's not real," he said, his voice cracking. "It's an illusion. It has to be." But the stench of algae and rot filled Ethan's nostrils, the damp air clung to his skin, and the sound of distant waves whispered in his ears. It was real. Sarah whispered again, her voice trembling, "Blood must answer blood." The footsteps returned. The same deliberate, dragging sound they had heard before, echoing across the warped house. But this time, they didn't come from the staircase. They came from the water. All of them turned toward the pool. A pale hand broke the surface. Small. Childlike. Fingers bloated and waterlogged, skin a ghastly shade of gray. It reached upward, dripping black water onto the warped floorboards. Another hand followed. Then, slowly, a head emerged. Blonde hair plastered to a pale skull, water streaming down a face that had once been innocent. Eyes too dark, too wide, locked on Ethan. "Tommy!" Jess shrieked, collapsing into Daniel's arms. Sarah buried her face in her hands, sobbing hysterically. Daniel stood frozen, his lips moving soundlessly. Ethan could not move, could not breathe. His heart thundered, his entire body screaming at him to run, but there was nowhere left to run. The board pulsed brighter, forcing his gaze down to his dagger token. And the boy in the water smiled. The sight of Tommy's waterlogged face rising from the lake in the middle of the cabin carved silence through the group like a blade. Ethan's throat locked tight, his pulse hammering in his ears so violently it drowned out Jess's whimpers and Sarah's sobbing. The boy's grin widened, lips pale and torn, teeth showing through ragged gums. Water poured steadily from his mouth as though he were still submerged. Ethan stumbled backward, his heel catching on warped wood, and nearly fell. "This isn't real," he whispered, shaking his head violently. "He's dead. He's been dead for years. This isn't." But the lake stretched wider across the floorboards, black water lapping against Ethan's shoes. The house creaked as if expanding to accommodate it. Every instinct screamed at him to flee, yet the walls pressed closer, the ceiling seemed lower, the air thicker with moisture. The board pulsed, and the card's words echoed inside his skull, "Return to where it began. Blood must answer blood." Tommy's voice followed. Gurgling, wet, each word bubbling with liquid. "You pushed me." Jess shrieked, clapping her hands over her ears. Sarah dropped to her knees, reciting half-remembered prayers through sobs. Daniel took a step forward, his face pale but his jaw clenched, as though he were trying to put himself between Ethan and the thing that shouldn't exist. But Ethan knew, it wasn't Daniel the lake wanted. It wasn't Jess. It wasn't Sarah. It was him. The water rippled violently, and suddenly something invisible latched onto Ethan's ankle. Cold, slimy, crushing. He cried out, stumbling as he was dragged forward. Daniel lunged, grabbing his arm, muscles straining as Ethan's shoe disappeared beneath the surface. "Hold on. I've got you." But the force was too strong. Ethan's leg sank up to the knee, icy water soaking his jeans in an instant. He could feel fingers, many of them, gripping, clawing, pulling him down. Daniel screamed in frustration, pulling with all his strength, but Ethan was yanked further until he teetered on the edge of the pool. Ethan's gaze met Tommy's. The boy's swollen eyes reflected no life, no innocence, only a hunger that froze Ethan's blood. "It's your turn," Tommy croaked, his head tilting unnaturally as though his neck had snapped. With a violent jerk, Ethan was pulled fully into the black water. The cold hit him like knives piercing every inch of his body. His lungs seized as he plunged downward, the surface above disappearing into darkness. Panic surged through him as he thrashed, arms flailing in desperate strokes. But the water was not like any lake he'd ever known. It was endless, bottomless, and heavy, pulling him deeper with every frantic kick. Shapes moved around him in the dark. Small figures, blurred, shifting, their pale limbs twitching unnaturally. He tried to scream, but only bubbles escaped, drifting upward before being swallowed by the blackness. His chest burned, his body demanding air. And then, Tommy was there. He appeared inches from Ethan's face, hair floating around his swollen head, his dead eyes locked onto Ethan's. His mouth opened, water pouring forth, and yet Ethan heard him as clearly as if he were whispering into his ear. "I never left, Ethan. You brought me here. You made the game." Ethan shook his head violently, bubbles bursting from his lips, but Tommy's words dug into him like hooks. "You made the game." A flash of memory stabbed through Ethan's mind, that summer afternoon by the lake, long before Tommy's accident. Ethan had been the one to suggest the game, had been the one to write its rules in a notebook. The dares, the punishments, the idea that the game could decide who was safe and who wasn't. It had all been his creation, a cruel joke among children. But it hadn't stayed a joke. Something had answered. Tommy's hands shot forward, seizing Ethan's throat with impossible strength. Ethan's lungs screamed for air, his chest convulsing. He clawed at Tommy's wrists, but the boy's grip was unyielding, his bloated face expressionless as he forced Ethan deeper into the dark. Through the haze of panic, Ethan saw movement below. The other figures he'd glimpsed before were closer now. Dozens of them. Children. Their bodies twisted, broken, waterlogged. Faces pale, eyes black voids. They circled, watching. Silent witnesses to Ethan's torment. Ethan's vision blurred. Darkness clawed at the edges of his sight. His body slowed, heavy, limp. He knew this was it, he would drown here, in this impossible lake, consumed by guilt and vengeance. But then, hands grabbed him. Strong hands. Daniel's. Through the suffocating dark, Ethan felt himself being wrenched upward. Tommy's grip faltered as Daniel pulled with desperate strength, dragging Ethan toward the faint shimmer of light above. Ethan's chest felt like it would explode, but he forced his limbs to move, to fight upward. They broke the surface with a violent splash. Ethan gasped, sucking in air so sharply it burned his lungs raw. He coughed, water spewing from his mouth, clinging to Daniel's arm like a drowning man. The cabin snapped back into focus. He was sprawled on the wet floorboards, coughing violently, Sarah sobbing beside him, Jess staring at him with wide, horrified eyes. Daniel knelt over him, panting, his hands trembling from the effort of pulling Ethan free. But the lake was still there. Still spreading. Its surface rippled unnaturally, and from it rose more hands, dozens of them. Small, pale, skeletal. They reached upward, grasping blindly, hungry. The board pulsed brighter than ever before, and the dagger token slid again, this time without a roll. It stopped on a blood-red square that seemed to burn through the darkness. A new card rose from the deck, spinning before landing with a sharp slap. Its words were short, but they froze the blood in all of their veins. One must stay beneath. Or all will follow. The cabin trembled, the lake's surface bubbling violently, and Tommy's laughter, wet, childlike, echoing from nowhere and everywhere, filled the room. The card lay on the table, its words carved in black ink that seemed to shimmer like oil, one must stay beneath. Or all will follow. None of them moved at first. The only sound was the steady drip of water, echoing from the ceiling beams, though none of them could see where it came from. The cabin was no longer just damp, it was saturated, as if every wall had been soaked in lake water for decades. Jess was the first to break the silence. She pressed both hands to her mouth, muffling a sob. Her eyes darted from the card to the lake and back again. "It wants us to sacrifice someone," she whispered through trembling lips. "It wants one of us to die." Daniel swore under his breath, his fists clenching so tightly his knuckles turned white. "No. No, we're not doing this. We're not letting some cursed game decide who lives and who doesn't." But the words rang hollow, and everyone knew it. The game had already decided before, and it had punished them every time they resisted. Ethan coughed, still choking on lake water, his throat raw and lungs burning. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked into a rasp. If we don't choose, it'll take us all. Sarah shook her head violently, her face streaked with tears. That's what it wants you to think. That's how it controls us. It lies, Ethan. It lies. But her voice wavered with doubt, and she couldn't meet his eyes. The floorboards groaned beneath them. The black water surged higher, spilling outward in rivulets that crept toward their shoes. The lake was no longer content with waiting, it was coming for them. And as if to remind them of the rules, Tommy's drowned voice rose again from the depths, gurgling and cruel, one for all, or all for one. Jess screamed and clapped her hands over her ears, her entire body trembling. Daniel moved to her side, holding her shoulders as if shielding her from a truth that was already unavoidable. But Ethan couldn't look away from the lake. He saw faces beneath the surface now, dozens of them. Children he didn't recognize, their pallid eyes staring up with a mixture of hunger and desperation. Their mouths open and closed like fish gasping for air, but no words came out. Just silence. Silent witnesses, waiting. The board pulsed again. The dagger token slid forward on its own, stopping on a square that pulsed so brightly it cast red light across their faces. Another card rose, hovered, and dropped. Its message was even more merciless. Choose freely, or the lake will choose for you. A heavy silence fell. Sarah's breathing quickened, shallow and ragged. Jess's sobs became a thin wail. Daniel's eyes blazed as he rounded on Ethan. You started this, he spat, his voice low and dangerous. You made this stupid game when we were kids. You wrote the rules. Maybe it's time you paid for it. Ethan's stomach dropped, but he didn't argue. He couldn't, not when the truth weighed on him heavier than any curse. He had been the one to invent their childhood game, turning dares and punishments into a ritualized challenge. He had been the one to write that someone had to pay the price if the game was broken. He had never meant for it to go beyond childish cruelty, but it had. And now the board had twisted his own rules against him. I know, Ethan said hoarsely, his eyes burning with unshed tears. I know it's my fault. But dying won't fix it. If it wanted only me, it would have taken me already. This thing, it feeds on all of us. Daniel's jaw clenched, his fists trembling, but his gaze flicked toward Jess, still sobbing, shaking violently, and Sarah, who was rocking back and forth in silent prayer. The idea of letting either of them go was unbearable. Sarah suddenly stopped rocking. She lifted her head slowly, her tear-streaked face calm in a way that chilled Ethan more than her hysteria had. Maybe it's right, she whispered. Her voice was soft, hollow, but steady. Maybe one of us has to stay. Maybe that's the only way the rest of us walk out alive. Jess cried out, shaking her head furiously. No! No, Sarah, don't say that. We can't let it win. There has to be another way. But the lake was rising faster now, the waterline creeping past their ankles. The house itself groaned as though straining under the weight of the impossible lake within its walls. The faces beneath the surface pressed closer, distorted by rippling water, their eyes wide with anticipation. Tommy rose higher, his torso breaking the surface. His chest was pale and bloated, his ribs jutting beneath gray flesh. He tilted his head toward Ethan, then to Daniel, then toward the girls, his gurgling laughter bubbling up from his drowned lungs. One stays, all play. Ethan's hands trembled violently. His mind screamed at him to deny it, to find another path, but the truth was undeniable. Every rule of the game had played out exactly as the cards demanded. If they refused, the game punished them. Mark had been taken because of that. Jess had nearly been strangled because of that. The board wasn't giving them a choice, it was delivering a sentence. Jess clutched Daniel's arm, her nails digging into his skin. Please, Danny, don't let it take me. Please don't let it take me. Daniel's face twisted, torn between rage and helplessness. He pulled Jess closer, glaring at Ethan as though the decision had already been made. Then it'll be him. It has to be him. Sarah stood slowly, her wet dress clinging to her body, her face pale but resolute. She shook her head. No. If it wanted Ethan, it would have dragged him down when it had the chance. It's making us choose. That's the real game. Ethan's chest heaved, his breath coming in sharp, ragged bursts. He wanted to scream at them, to beg them not to turn on each other, but words failed him. The board glowed brighter, the cards shivering in the deck as though impatient. The water surged up to their knees. The hands beneath the surface clawed upward, fingers breaking through in hungry waves. Tommy's grin stretched unnaturally wide, his voice echoing around the cabin in a chorus of wet whispers. Choose. Or drown together. The demand hung in the damp air like a noose. Choose. Or drown together. No one moved at first. They stood knee-deep in the black water, staring at one another, their faces pale and hollow, every line of friendship worn thin by terror. The house groaned around them, beams straining under invisible weight. Every drip of water, every ripple on the lake surface seemed to count down the seconds they had left before the game decided for them. Jess clung to Daniel's arm, sobbing into his shoulder. Her words came broken, gasping. I don't want to die. Please don't let it take me, Danny, please. Her nails dug into his flesh, desperate, almost feral. Daniel's jaw was tight, his breath shallow, but his eyes were fixed on Ethan with an intensity that cut like a blade. Ethan tried to hold his gaze, but the guilt crushed him. The truth was undeniable, he had made the game. He had scribbled the dares and rules on notebook paper, he had turned their boredom into something cruel, and he had written, half as a joke, half as a thrill, that the game chooses who pays the price. And now here it was, alive, demanding payment. Sarah broke the silence, her voice strangely steady. We're wasting time. If we don't choose, it'll take all of us. That's what it said. That's what it's always done, punished us for fighting back. Her eyes, red from crying, met Ethan's for only a moment before flicking to Jess. We can't all survive this. Jess shrieked, pushing herself closer against Daniel. No! Don't you dare look at me like that. I didn't do anything. I didn't make the rules. This is Ethan's fault, he should be the one. Daniel seized the words, spitting them like venom. She's right. He wrote the rules. He started this whole nightmare. He's the reason Mark is gone, the reason this thing keeps coming for us. If anyone's going under, it should be him. The accusation hit Ethan like a blow. He staggered back, his chest heaving. He wanted to argue, to scream that he hadn't meant for any of this, that he had been a kid, that none of them could have predicted what the game would become. But words caught in his throat. The water swirled around his legs, icy and thick, pulling at him as though agreeing with Daniel. Sarah's voice cut through the tension, trembling but clear. If it really just wanted Ethan, it would have kept him under. It let him go. Why? Because it wants us to choose. That's the point, it feeds on our fear, our guilt, our betrayal. Her words made sense, but her gaze lingered on Jess, soft but firm. And it always takes the weakest piece first. Jess froze, her sobs cutting off into a sharp gasp. Her eyes widened, horrified, as if Sarah had just sentenced her. No, no, please, not me. I can't go in there. Daniel erupted, his voice raw with fury. You shut your mouth, Sarah. If you even think about touching her. The house shuddered violently, the water splashing higher. The game was growing impatient. Tommy's drowned laughter echoed from the lake, bubbling through the dark surface, joined by the faint voices of the other dead children beneath. They whispered in unison, distorted and overlapping, choose. 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 The pressure broke. Daniel lunged at Ethan. With one hand still clutching Jess, he shoved Ethan backward, his strength fueled by blind rage. Ethan stumbled, his back slamming against the table, dice scattering across the wet surface. His chest burned with panic. He saw Daniel's intent as clearly as if it were written on the walls. Daniel was going to throw him into the lake. Ethan's survival instinct roared. He lashed out, grabbing Daniel's wrist, shoving back with everything he had. The two of them struggled, slipping on the wet boards, their movements frantic and desperate. Jess screamed, begging Daniel to stop, but she didn't move to intervene. Sarah stood frozen, her wide eyes darting between them, her hands shaking violently. Ethan's foot slipped, and for a heartbeat he felt the cold water swallow his calf. Terror exploded in him, giving him a burst of strength. He shoved Daniel backward, and for an instant he thought he'd broken free. But Daniel's hand shot out, grabbing Ethan's shirt, dragging him toward the water's edge. They crashed against the floor, inches from the lake. Pale hands reached out, grasping, brushing against Ethan's hair and shoulders, trying to drag him under. The touch was freezing, suffocating, and he screamed in panic, thrashing wildly. Jess's voice cut through the chaos, shrill and desperate. "Stop it, both of you! Stop!" But her plea carried no weight. The game had them now, pitting them against each other like pieces on its board. Daniel's face twisted with fury and grief. "You deserve this, Ethan. You killed him, you killed Tommy." The words stunned Ethan, cutting deeper than Daniel's grip. His vision blurred, the memory of that day at the lake flashing in jagged fragments, the shove, Tommy's scream, the water closing over his head. He had never spoken of it, never admitted the truth even to himself. But Daniel knew. He had always known. Ethan's strength faltered, guilt and horror crashing over him. Daniel pushed harder, forcing Ethan's face toward the water. The hands beneath the surface surged upward, eager to claim him. And then, Sarah moved. Her scream split the air as she lunged, shoving Daniel with a force that startled even him. His balance broke, his grip tearing from Ethan's shirt. Daniel staggered, his arms flailing, and before anyone could stop it, he fell backward into the lake. The water swallowed him whole. Jess shrieked, her voice raw with terror, as she dropped to her knees, reaching toward the surface. "Daniel! Daniel!" But the lake had already begun to close over him, the ripples spreading outward as pale hands wrapped around his body, dragging him deeper. His muffled scream bubbled through the black water, cut short as his face vanished beneath the surface. Ethan lay sprawled on the floor, gasping for air, his chest heaving. Sarah collapsed beside him, her body trembling violently, her eyes wide with horror at what she had done. Jess's sobs filled the cabin, her wails bouncing off the warped walls like an echo of loss that would never end. The board pulsed once more, brighter than ever, and the dagger token slid forward. A card rose and landed with a wet slap against the table. Its words burned into their eyes. "The sacrifice is made. But the game has only begun." The lake bubbled violently, and Daniel's scream, ragged, distant, but unmistakable, echoed from beneath the surface, promising he was not gone, not yet. Jess's wails filled the warped cabin, her voice cracking into something animal, raw with grief. "No! Daniel! No, no, no!" She clawed at the floorboards near the water's edge, splinters digging into her hands as if she could somehow reach him through the impossible depths. But the lake swallowed all sound except the faint bubbling echoes of Daniel's last scream. Ethan sat hunched against the wall, chest heaving, each breath ragged. His skin prickled with icy sweat, his lungs still aching from near drowning. He stared blankly at the water, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Daniel, the strongest of them, the one who had always led when they were kids, was gone. Not just gone. Taken. The pale hands had claimed him, dragging him down into the dark. Sarah knelt on the soaked boards, her hands trembling violently. She stared at the black surface, her lips moving but no words coming out. Her wide eyes shimmered with shock. She had pushed him. She had made the choice. And now, no matter what the game did next, she would live with that truth. The board pulsed again. The dagger token slid forward on its own, the scraping sound sharp and cruel in the silence. A card rose, twirling before landing in front of them. Jess let out a broken gasp as she read the words aloud, her voice quivering. "The drowned do not rest. He will return, but not as he was." The words sank into their bones like ice. Ethan felt bile rise in his throat. He didn't need to ask what the card meant. The game had taken Daniel, but it wasn't finished with him. The water stirred. Slowly at first, just small ripples that lapped at the edges of the cabin floor. Then, with growing violence, bubbles surged upward, breaking the surface in frantic bursts. Jess scrambled backward, her face pale, but her eyes never left the center of the lake. A hand shot out of the water. Not the pale, bloated hand of Tommy, but one larger, stronger, veins bulging beneath gray flesh. Another hand followed, gripping the warped boards with unnatural force. And then, with a splash that sent black water spraying across the cabin, Daniel emerged. But it wasn't Daniel anymore. His skin was mottled, waterlogged, stretched taut in some places and sagging in others. His eyes were pure black, twin voids that reflected nothing. Water poured endlessly from his mouth and nose, gurgling with every rasping breath. His clothes clung to him like a second skin, dripping, torn, reeking of rot. He hauled himself onto the floor with unnatural strength, his fingers gouging deep furrows into the wood. Jess screamed, scrambling backward until her back hit the wall. "Daniel! Oh my God, Daniel!" Her voice cracked, desperate, but the thing that wore Daniel's face didn't look at her. Its gaze locked on Ethan. Ethan froze, paralyzed by the sight. Somewhere beneath that bloated mask, he saw the memory of his friend, the boy he had once dared to climb trees with, the teenager who had driven them all to that lake, the man who had stood up to him minutes ago. But whatever climbed out of the water now wasn't Daniel. It was the game's creation. A piece on the board. "Danny," Jess whispered, her voice trembling, her hands outstretched. "Please, it's me. It's Jess. You know me, you love me." The drowned thing tilted its head slowly, water gurgling from its throat. For a heartbeat, Jess's hope flickered. Then, without warning, it lunged at her. Jess screamed, scrambling to her feet, but the drowned thing was too fast. It grabbed her arm with impossible strength, pulling her down so hard her skull cracked against the floor. She shrieked in pain, kicking and thrashing, but its grip only tightened. Black water spilled from its mouth, splashing onto her face, searing her skin as if it were acid. She gagged, choking, clawing at his swollen hands. "Help her!" Ethan's voice cracked as he stumbled forward, but Sarah grabbed his wrist, holding him back with surprising force. Her eyes were wide with terror, but her voice was clear. "Don't touch him. It's not Daniel anymore, don't you see? It's part of the game now." Jess's screams grew shrill, piercing, as the drowned thing tried to drag her toward the water. The lake surged, its dark surface reaching out like a living thing, lapping hungrily at her heels. Her nails clawed bloody trails across the floorboards as she kicked, sobbing, her pleas breaking into wordless shrieks. Ethan couldn't bear it. He tore free from Sarah and lunged at Daniel's twisted form, slamming his shoulder into him with all the strength he had left. The impact sent them both sprawling sideways, Jess jerking free of the creature's grip. She scrambled across the floor, gasping, tears and lake water streaming down her face. Daniel, or the thing that had been Daniel, rose slowly, water pouring from his every movement. He turned that hollow, black-eyed stare back toward Ethan. His head tilted at an unnatural angle, his neck cracking with the sound of splintering wood. And then, for the first time, he spoke. His voice was wet, distorted, bubbling with water. Yet beneath the gurgle, Ethan heard Daniel's tone, familiar, furious, accusing. "You should have been me." Ethan's chest tightened. The words struck like a blade, cutting deep into the guilt he had carried since childhood. His knees trembled as the drowned thing stepped toward him, water pooling in its footprints. Sarah grabbed Ethan's arm again, pulling him back, her eyes wide with realization. "Don't you get it? The game brought him back for you. It wants you to face him. It won't stop until you do." Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. He knew she was right. The game had twisted Daniel's anger, his accusations, into something monstrous. And now it wanted Ethan to play against his own friend, his own crime, on the board it had created. Jess sobbed in the corner, her voice breaking into a whisper. "We're never getting out of here. We're never leaving. It's just going to keep making us hurt each other until there's nothing left." The drowned thing lunged again, its gurgling roar filling the cabin as the lake surged higher, swallowing more of the floor. Ethan stumbled back, his eyes darting to the board. The dagger token gleamed blood-red, waiting for him to roll. He realized, with a sick twist of his stomach, that this was no longer about survival. It was about finishing the game. The cabin shook as if the lake itself had drawn breath, its black water swelling higher, licking at the base of the walls. The air was damp, stinking of mildew, copper, and rot. Ethan's chest tightened as he stared at the board. The dice gleamed faintly, slick with condensation, as though the game itself had been waiting for this exact moment, for him. Daniel's drowned form stood a few feet away, towering, his sodden frame hunched unnaturally. His black eyes never blinked, never shifted, fixed solely on Ethan. Each step Daniel took splashed water across the warped floor, and every drop carried with it the scent of the grave. Ethan's throat constricted. He could almost believe he was looking into a mirror of fate. This was what awaited him if he refused to play. The dagger token sat in front of Ethan on the board, glowing faintly red as if bathed in blood. The implication was clear. He had to roll. He had to take his turn, or the game would choose for him. "Don't," Jess whimpered from the corner. Her voice was broken, hoarse from screaming. She pressed her body against the wall, clutching her bruised arm where Daniel had nearly dragged her under. "Don't roll it. Please, Ethan, if you do, it'll make you fight him. You can't beat him, he's already dead." Ethan's hand hovered above the dice, trembling. His mind swirled with panic. Sarah crouched beside him, her eyes wild, whispering urgently. "She's wrong. Don't you see? The game won't stop until we play by its rules. If you don't roll, it'll punish all of us. It's already decided you're next." The drowned thing gurgled, water spilling endlessly from its mouth. Slowly, unnervingly, it raised one hand and pointed at Ethan. Its voice bubbled out, thick with hate and loss. "You stole my turn." Ethan staggered back, bile rising in his throat. He remembered the last summer at the lake, when they had played this same game as children. Daniel had wanted to take the final move that night, but Ethan, stubborn and jealous of losing, had grabbed the dice and rolled first. The result had been nothing, just a stupid end to a stupid game. But Daniel had sulked, throwing the box into the lake. They had all laughed. None of them realized that act had been a kind of offering. And now the game remembered. The dice sat in his palm, heavier than they should have been, warm like living flesh. Ethan closed his eyes, whispering to no one, to everyone. "I don't have a choice." He rolled. The dice clattered against the damp wood, bouncing, tumbling, spinning wildly before settling into stillness. A 5. The dagger token moved forward 5 spaces, stopping on a space with a crude symbol carved into it, 2 figures locked in combat. Another card slid from the deck, rising as though lifted by unseen fingers. It fluttered and landed face up. Duel. To win, you must strike true. To lose is to join the drowned. The drowned Daniel let out a shriek, high-pitched and wet, like air escaping lungs filled with water. He lunged at Ethan, knocking aside a chair as though it were weightless. Ethan stumbled backward, grabbing the nearest thing he could find, a splintered table leg, soaked and rotting but solid enough to serve as a weapon. Their clash was brutal, awkward, desperate. Daniel swung with unnatural strength, each blow sending shockwaves through Ethan's bones as he blocked with the table leg. His arms ached instantly, his muscles screaming. Daniel's waterlogged skin made every strike slippery, impossible to hold onto, and the smell, God, the smell, was overwhelming, like rotting fish in stagnant graves. Ethan swung wildly, striking Daniel across the shoulder. The impact split open swollen flesh, but instead of blood, a torrent of lake water poured out, splashing across Ethan's face. He gagged, stumbling, choking on the foul taste. Daniel didn't even flinch. "Ethan!" Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. She had her hands on the board, her eyes scanning it frantically. The duel isn't about killing him, it's about the game. The dagger token. You have to finish the move. Ethan staggered, narrowly dodging another blow that sent cracks splintering through the floorboards. He glanced at the board, at the dagger token waiting on its blood-red square. His stomach twisted. She was right. The duel wasn't physical. It was ritual. But Daniel was between him and the board. Jess sobbed from the corner, "You can't do this. You'll die. It wants you to die, Ethan." Her words sliced into his chest, but Ethan knew she was wrong. If he didn't play, they'd all die. Or worse. He tightened his grip on the table leg, eyes narrowing. "Then I'll finish it." He charged. Daniel roared, arms flailing, water spraying like a storm surge. Ethan ducked under a massive swing, feeling the wind of it brush his hair, and barreled past, slamming his body against Daniel's bloated chest. The creature staggered back, arms outstretched, shrieking in fury. Ethan lunged for the board. His trembling hand slammed the dagger token down, completing the move. The board reacted instantly. The entire cabin shook, water exploding upward as if the lake itself had erupted beneath them. Daniel froze mid-lunge, his body convulsing violently. His black eyes widened, and for a flicker of a second, Ethan swore he saw something human inside them: fear, sorrow, betrayal. Then the water consumed him. His body collapsed into a torrent, splashing across the floor before vanishing back into the lake. The surface stilled. Silence fell. Ethan collapsed to his knees, gasping, his whole body shaking uncontrollably. Jess sobbed in the corner, clutching her chest, while Sarah stood frozen, her face pale, her hands still gripping the edges of the board. The dagger token gleamed faintly before sliding itself back into the center. The dice lifted, spinning once, and dropped in front of Jess. Her turn. Jess's face drained of all color. She shook her head violently, backing away from the board. "No. No, I won't. I'm not doing this. I'm done." The board pulsed dark red. The lake stirred again, small ripples spreading across its surface. Sarah whispered hoarsely, "Jess, if you don't roll, it'll punish you. You saw what happened when Daniel resisted. It'll take you." Jess let out a broken laugh, somewhere between hysteria and despair. "Then let it. I can't fight anymore, I can't." The water bubbled ominously, as if answering her. A shadow moved beneath the surface, circling, waiting. Jess's trembling hands clutched her knees, her sobs echoing through the cabin. The dice sat in front of her, silent, patient, inevitable. Ethan's voice rasped, low and desperate. "Jess, you don't have a choice." Jess's sobs broke into hiccuping gasps, each one rawer than the last. She shook her head violently, her wet hair plastering across her face, her eyes wide and shimmering with wild defiance. The dice lay inches from her knees, gleaming faintly in the dim cabin light, their white pips reflecting like teeth in the dark. They weren't just dice anymore, they were fangs waiting to bite. "I won't do it," she whispered, her voice hoarse, cracked. Her nails dug into her arms so deeply that blood welled beneath them. "Don't you get it? Every roll, every turn, it's just feeding this thing. It doesn't want us to win. It wants us to destroy each other, one by one." The cabin answered with a groan, the wood beneath them creaking as if under immense weight. Water seeped higher, swirling now around their shins. From beneath the lake's surface, a ripple expanded, slow and deliberate, as though something enormous had stirred. Ethan crouched forward, his voice strained, desperate to cut through her panic. "Jess, listen to me. I know it's cruel, I know it's rigged, but if you don't roll, it'll take you anyway. That's what it does. It punishes. Look at Daniel. Look at Tommy. They didn't get a choice." Jess snapped her head toward him, her eyes wild. "And what about you? What about Sarah? What if the game spares you and leaves me for last? What if I'm the sacrifice that's been waiting for this whole time?" Her voice cracked as she screamed the last words, echoing in the suffocating air. You don't know. You don't know what it wants. The board pulsed again, a dull, hungry throb. The dice rolled slightly on their own, nudging closer to her trembling legs. Sarah's voice was tight, whisper-sharp, filled with something Jess had never heard in her before, fear disguised as authority. Jess, listen to me. We don't get to argue with the rules. It doesn't matter what it wants, it matters what it demands. And right now it's demanding you. Jess stared at her, betrayal flashing across her face. Of course you'd say that. You've been the game's favorite since the start. It hasn't touched you. It hasn't dragged you down, hasn't drowned you, hasn't made you bleed. Maybe you're working with it. Maybe it chose you. Sarah flinched as if struck, her face tightening, but she said nothing. The water bubbled violently now, sending spray into the air, dampening the walls. A shape began circling just beneath the surface, larger than before, its shadow dark and serpentine. Jess scrambled backward, her body pressed so hard against the wall she seemed to melt into it. I won't, she screamed, her voice breaking. I won't play anymore. Do you hear me? I quit. The lake answered. The water surged upward like a living hand, a column of liquid that rose, twisting, taking shape. Jess shrieked as tendrils of black water lashed out, wrapping around her ankles, yanking her off the floor. Her nails clawed at the wood, leaving deep scratches as she kicked and thrashed, but the water dragged her inexorably toward the center of the cabin, toward the board. Ethan and Sarah lunged forward, each grabbing one of her arms, pulling with all their strength. The three of them formed a grotesque tug-of-war, Jess screaming, her body half submerged in the writhing water, Ethan and Sarah straining with every fiber of muscle to hold her back. The board glowed red, and the dice lifted into the air, hovering above Jess's face. Her head whipped back and forth, her hair plastering across her soaked cheeks. No! Don't make me! Don't! The dice dropped into her open palm. The water released her instantly, dropping her hard onto the soaked floor. She coughed violently, gagging on the lake water that had filled her mouth, but her fingers remained clenched around the dice. Her eyes widened in horror. The game had decided for her. Roll, Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Jess shook her head weakly, sobs spilling from her throat. No, no more. I can't. But her hands moved anyway. Trembling, jerking as if guided by invisible strings, her fingers unfurled. The dice slipped from her palm and clattered onto the board. They spun for an impossibly long time, bouncing from one edge to the other, rattling like bones in a crypt. At last, they landed. Snake eyes. A 2. The dagger token slid forward 2 spaces, stopping on a square etched with an hourglass symbol. A card rose from the deck, twisting in midair before falling face up in front of Jess. She read it aloud through shaking lips, her voice barely a whisper. Time runs out. Sacrifice the one you love most, or forfeit your future. Her breath hitched. She dropped the card as though it had burned her skin. No. No, no, no. The board pulsed. The lake churned violently, sending waves slamming against the cabin walls. The shadow beneath the surface grew sharper, closer, circling like a predator. Ethan's heart dropped into his stomach. He knew exactly who the card referred to. Jess's love, buried beneath years of secrets and regrets, had always been Daniel. And Daniel was already gone. Jess's sobs turned into gasping screams. She pounded her fists against the floor, shaking her head violently. It's not fair. He's already dead. I can't choose again. The drowned Daniel's face flickered across the surface of the lake, a vision both grotesque and sorrowful, his black eyes staring at her from below. The game wasn't asking her to kill Daniel. It was asking her to replace him. Jess's breath came in hysterical gulps. She turned to Ethan and Sarah, her eyes wild, her voice a broken plea. Please, please, one of you, take my place. I can't do it. Neither of them moved. The cabin shuddered again, the walls groaning as water poured in through widening cracks. The board glowed brighter, its symbols pulsing like veins. The card hovered back into Jess's lap, its words searing themselves into her mind. Sacrifice the one you love most, or forfeit your future. Her trembling hands rose to her throat as she realized what the game wanted. If she couldn't give it Daniel, it would take her. Her entire life, her future, swallowed by the lake. The water surged upward once more, wrapping around her waist like a serpent, dragging her toward the surface. Jess screamed, thrashing, her fingernails clawing at the wood until they bent and snapped. Please! Don't let it take me! Please! Ethan lunged forward, grabbing her wrist. Sarah grabbed the other, both of them straining, their bodies half submerged as the water pulled harder. Jess's eyes rolled with terror, her voice breaking into raw, guttural cries. I don't want to die. The lake roared in response, a deep, hollow sound that shook the cabin's foundation. And then, with a violent yank, Jess was gone, dragged beneath the surface in an explosion of black water. The cabin stilled. The water settled. The dice returned to the center of the board, waiting. Ethan and Sarah sat in stunned silence, drenched and shivering, the echo of Jess's screams lingering in the air. The game pulsed again, and the dice rolled themselves across the board. They stopped in front of Sarah. Her turn. The cabin was silent. Too silent. Ethan's ragged breaths echoed in the stillness, each inhale a reminder of who had been lost. Jess's screams still clung to the walls like smoke, lingering long after the lake had swallowed her. The floor was slick with water, blood, and the strange residue of the drowned, and yet the board remained pristine, untouched, gleaming, alive. The dice sat before Sarah, glowing faintly, patient as ever. They did not shake or roll of their own accord this time. They simply waited. Sarah's pale face reflected the glow. Her lips trembled, but her eyes, though wide, carried a strange calm. It was as though she had expected this moment all along. Ethan crouched beside her, shaking his head, his voice raw. No. Don't. Don't touch them. We can stop. We don't have to play anymore. The board pulsed, once, in warning. Sarah gave a hollow laugh, her gaze locked on the dice. You don't understand, do you? We were never players, Ethan. We've been pieces since the very beginning. Ethan recoiled at her words. His throat tightened, and he stammered, What are you talking about? Her eyes flicked toward him, filled with something between pity and bitterness. Think back. Think about how it all started. The summer we first played. The stupid rules we didn't understand. Daniel throwing the game into the lake. Do you really think it was chance that we found it again after all these years? Ethan shook his head violently. No. No, it was buried in that cabin. We stumbled across it. No, Sarah interrupted, her voice sharp as glass. It found us. It always finds us. Every time we've thought we were done, it's been there, waiting. Every choice we made wasn't ours. It's been guiding us since we were kids. The water stirred faintly, agreeing with her, ripples spreading across its black surface. Ethan's chest constricted. He wanted to argue, to deny, but a terrible weight pressed down on him. Memories flickered like lightning, nights filled with strange dreams about the lake, sudden urges to call his old friends back together, the uncanny way the cabin had seemed to appear in his memory only days before they arrived. Had they chosen to come? Or had the game summoned them? Sarah's trembling hands reached toward the dice. If I don't roll, it'll take me like Jess. If I do, maybe, just maybe, it'll finally end. Or maybe it'll end you, Ethan rasped, grabbing her wrist. His eyes burned with desperation. Don't you see? That's what it wants. Each of us, one by one. If you roll, you'll be next. And then I'll be last. That's the pattern. That's the way it always plays out. For a moment, her eyes softened. She looked at him with something almost human, almost tender. And then she whispered, maybe that's the only way we can win. The dice rattled in her palm before she could stop herself. They clattered onto the board, spinning with a speed that seemed impossible, humming with power. Ethan reached for them, but it was too late. They landed. A 6. The dagger token shot forward 6 spaces, stopping at the final square on the board, a black circle carved with a sigil none of them had seen before. It pulsed, alive, like a beating heart. A card rose from the deck, hovering in the air, trembling as if even the game itself strained against the weight of its command. It flipped slowly, face up. The last roll decides all, one must remain, one must drown. The winner keeps the future. The loser belongs to the lake. Sarah's face drained of color. She turned to Ethan, her lips parting, but no words came. The water surged violently, the lake roaring as the shadow beneath the surface expanded, rising, twisting into something colossal. The drowned hands returned, hundreds of them, clawing from the water, reaching, waiting. Ethan staggered backward, shaking his head. No. No, 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 it's not fair. We didn't choose this. Sarah's eyes locked on his, her voice breaking. That's the point. We never chose. We never had a choice. The board pulsed again, and the dagger token split into 2. One slid toward Ethan. The other slid toward Sarah. A duel. The room shifted, the air tightening, the walls dripping with lake water as the floor trembled beneath their feet. The board's glow cast their shadows long and monstrous against the cabin walls. The game wanted blood. Ethan's heart hammered. He raised the broken table leg, his makeshift weapon still clutched in his bruised hands. Sarah stood across from him, empty-handed, her face pale, her lips trembling. Fight, the lake seemed to whisper, its roar sinking into words that vibrated through the air. Only one may leave. Ethan's hands shook violently. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. His whole body screamed against the command. I won't do it, he rasped, his throat raw. I won't kill her. I won't play your game anymore. But the board pulsed harder, the lake surged higher, and the drowned began to climb the walls. Their eyeless faces pressed against the cabin windows, their bloated hands slapping against the wood, filling the silence with wet, hungry sounds. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She shook her head, whispering, You don't understand, Ethan. It's not about us fighting each other. It's about you. His body went cold. What? Her trembling lips curved into something almost like a smile, though it was broken, tragic. The game wasn't playing us against each other. It was playing me against you. From the start. That's why it never touched me. That's why it kept you alive. You were always meant to be the last piece. The realization crashed into him like ice. Every choice, every move, every death had been leading to this. Not their survival, his sacrifice. Before he could respond, Sarah lunged, not at him, but at the board. Her hands slammed down on the dagger token in front of her, choosing. The board screamed. The lake erupted. The drowned surged upward, their arms coiling around her, dragging her toward the water. Her screams echoed through the cabin, not of terror but of release. It's you, Ethan. It's always been you. And then she was gone. The cabin fell silent. The drown receded. The water stilled. The board sat in front of Ethan. The dice rolled themselves one last time, clicking softly against the wood. They landed on a perfect 7. The final card rose. The contract is complete. The game is chosen. You are the last piece. The game keeps what it creates. The lake's surface rippled, reflecting not Ethan's face but something darker, hollow, empty-eyed. His reflection smiled when he did not. The cabin dissolved around him, swallowed by darkness. The last thing Ethan heard before the black water closed over his head was the board whispering in his own voice. What if your favorite childhood game wasn't just a game, but a contract?